So we're doing this, are we?
The mic was in picture. The mic was in picture.
I love game design. I like trying to craft the most fun and engaging experiences I can. When creating spaces for the player to interact with, every decision you make in this space incentivizes, reinforces, or discourages certain behaviors. You end up having a lot of indirect control over what they're doing and how they're doing it. It's like putting a rat in a maze to navigate while hoping it doesn't do anything funny with the Game Boy Micro. However, this is one thing when your end goal is just to make something fun. It's another thing entirely when ulterior motives are at play. In truth, these basic principles apply far beyond just video games. If someone is put into a space or situation, it's going to impact their behavior as they try to adapt and get through as best they can. This applies to our surroundings, cultural expectations, life experiences, laws, and other social systems. Those who craft our world have a big impact on how our time in it plays out, and perhaps this is most evident on the internet. I was one of those weirdos born in the mid-1990s, so the internet was just always there, at least as long as I've been cognizant. But it was still this cool new thing, and the public perception of it was very optimistic. However, despite this, we weren't as reliant on it as we are now. First off, there were more restrictions. Internet was paid for by hour. Also, these were the days of dial-up, so you couldn't use the phone while using it, or vice versa. As a kid who tried sneaking on the computer while my mom was on the phone, I learned this the hard way. Sure, I'd browse GeoCities sites and the like, but a lot of my time, as a dumb kid anyway, was spent checking out the official web pages of things I liked, or checking out sites friends would recommend, like Homestar Runner, or stuff on Newgrounds, or albinoblacksheep.com.
Can I come over to your house today? Well, I guess so, Tommy, but remember, my grandma likes to sit in her rocking chair in the middle of the driveway, so please don't run over her.
However, in the mid-2000s, YouTube was taking off, and the social media revolution had begun. I didn't join MySpace at the time, and I was hesitant to make a Facebook account, but I loved YouTube back then. I started an account there pretty sharply and spent a long time there. Now let's cut forward a bit. It's 2022. I returned to making YouTube videos after a long absence, and after starting transition. My first video was a retrospective on the Pac-Man maze games. I didn't mention that I'm trans in it because frankly it wasn't relevant to what I was talking about. However, I did try my hand at voice feminization, which is easier said than done. The video's thumbnail featured a drawing I made of myself, and I included the trans pride colors in my profile picture as a quick and dirty explanation in case people didn't read my community posts or watch some videos from 7 years prior where I mentioned the fact that I was trans.
I'm transgender.
People freaked out. Okay, to be fair, most people didn't. A lot of people were genuinely supportive, but oh boy, the floodgates were truly open. One guy in particular kept posting on that video, my community posts, and just whatever he could. Why are all my favorite YouTubers going trans all of a sudden? I'm just so tired of people lying about their biology. She literally has the trans flag as her background. She's very openly trans. Not that trans people owe you that information, but it's ridiculous to accuse her of lying about her biology when she couldn't be more clear about it. She is technically a dude? I just missed the good old days. From other comments I've seen of theirs, they're not very bright. I'm a dude, so I'm technically a he. Good for you. I'm just mad that one of my favorite YouTubers surrendered to the woke nation. I remember at the time people were worried that I'd be taking this pretty hard. I guess that's one way of putting it. However, as funny as I was finding his comments, it was clear that he wasn't doing himself any favors. He couldn't let it go. He kept responding to every response, every comment, and people kept responding to him. I could have let him keep going, have that engagement boost me in the algorithm, but at the end of the day, I just decided to block him for his own good. On one hand, this removed his comments, which is a loss, but on the other hand, it was clear that he really did need to touch grass. And it was really weird to have this be the comment section for a Pac-Man video. I just wanted to talk about the yellow lad. However, this stuck with me. He clearly felt that by me coming out as trans, despite having done so 7 years prior, I was taking something away from him. Then, years later, I was taking an Uber ride home from work, and the driver and I were having a discussion about creative projects we were both doing. She told me that when she came out as a lesbian online, she had people react similarly. We both felt that we weren't trying to exclude anyone. Her clothes weren't just for lesbians, and my videos are not just for trans people. Why though? What's driving this anxiety in people? Social media platforms are built on user-generated content. Basically, whatever people decide to upload. Over the years, a lot of this has consisted of people discussing their feelings on a piece of media, whether it be old or new. In the mid to late 2000s, American 80s nostalgia culture dominated the discussion. There were good things to come out of this, like the angry video game nerd in his prime.
I got it. I could come up with a game like this. How about you're a shark, and you gotta shake palm trees till trains fall down?
But we also got a lot of crap.
Blue, it was a GameCube. All of those games were terrible.
You mind saying that again to me? And my cubes. I have 4 of them. Who's up for a LAN party? It's weird going back to online media from around this time because a lot of it carries this narrative of what kids like now is bad. Things were perfect before and should never have changed.
Ah, 2D. You were so great to us, we had no need for a third dimension. Then things changed.
All while mixed in with this obnoxious Spike TV dude bro humor.
Other than that time with the cheap Chinese whore in Beijing, Raymond is just about as much fun as I've had with somebody who has no arms, legs, or any other limb that connects to the body.
Look, your orientation is valid, but can you please stop shoving your sexuality in my face? As you could imagine, as a young egg who liked the GameCube, Star Wars prequels, and 80s stuff, this was pretty off-putting. I think that this sort of thing caused a lot of people around my age, if not even younger, to try aging ourselves up by mimicking them so we could be part of the discussion without being alienated from it. I'm just saying, there was a pretty massive influx of teenagers glorifying the NES from around this time. This was the narrative. What's new is bad. What's old is good. However, as we entered the 2010s, live reactions as a means of promotion became more prevalent, especially with spooky, scary games that were never actually scary to begin with, but people pretend to piss themselves over for money. We also had fandom culture become more passionate, volatile, and frankly, scary. I think things like this, the growing abundance of shallow nostalgia bait, along with the rather restrictive lens of what dominated before, the tone started to shift to, oh my god, I am so hyped for new thing. Old stuff is boring. Keep it away from me. I don't care if it's good. Online discussion tends to flip-flop between the two extremes at different points and in different spaces, and frankly, I'm not a fan of either. I think it is foolish to over-romanticize the past. Just because it's older doesn't inherently mean that it's better. We may hold the classics dear to our hearts, but there is plenty of old crap that we just tend to forget about. Trends and culture tend to happen in waves, with each subsequent one responding to the one before. Not all change is good. Bad trends do emerge. However, if it's a bad time for one medium, it might be a better time for another. Or you might just have to do more digging to find what you want. If that fails, well, you still have the older stuff to enjoy. Also, there tends to be deeper issues catalyzing these bad trends rather than just, my childhood is better than your childhood, or nothing should have changed after I became an adult.
What are you selling in the end? You're selling creativity. The problem has always been with the studios, although the beginning of the studios, the entrepreneurs who ran the studios were sort of creative guys. Suddenly all these corporations were coming in. They didn't know anything about the movie business. So they said, well, maybe we should hire kids from film schools. They supposedly know how to make films. So suddenly we could get jobs, which was a fantastic thing. And for a few years, they kind of let us do our job, and all my friends, you know, that whole gang of people made successful movies. But then the studios went back to saying, well, we don't trust you people, and we think we know how to make movies. That the studios change everything all the time, and unfortunately, they don't have any imagination, and they don't have any talent. So what are you selling?
I understand not liking the world you grew into and wanting to absorb yourself in the comfort material from your childhood. But it's important to remember that conflating the innocence of childhood with that time period in which it took place paints a skewed picture of it. I grew up in the early 2000s. My favorite video game console is the GameCube. Oh man, things suck right now. What I wouldn't give to go back in time and re-experience the excitement of the GameCube coming out. Those were better times. That's right, the innocent times of fall 2001. If I hopped into a time machine and went back to the days of my childhood, I wouldn't be reliving the innocence and naivete. I'd be experiencing it from the eyes of an adult. Maybe I wouldn't be freaking out about the same things I am now, but other things would take their place. The only reason I can view those times with fondness and longing isn't because those times weren't turbulent. It's because I was a child. Dad, can you stop watching the news? I'm bored of watching US imperialism and wars overseas. I want to watch SpongeBob and play Pac-Man World 2! Okay, maybe that's a bit of an extreme example, but the same principle tends to apply regardless. To those romanticizing the 80s, you got the AIDS crisis, satanic panic, the spread of neoliberalism and wedge issues. I'm just saying, the 1950s weren't all Leave It to Beaver. So yes, I can look back at the early 2000s with fondness. I can indulge in all the Y2K aesthetic I can eat. God, I miss transparent tech. I can rewatch SpongeBob at its peak. I can play all the 6th gen games I can get my hands on. I can open a Windows XP virtual machine and enjoy the sheer aesthetic of it. However, doing so ignores both the geopolitical context surrounding them and also the bad trends from around the time, which there were plenty of. So when engaging in a serious discussion about the time period and the media in it, I have to put the rose-tinted goggles aside and look at things more critically. However, to dismiss or ignore the past is beyond frustrating to me, especially when discussing art, even more so with people who wish to make it themselves. Over time, mediums build up their own languages. How a film, for example, uses movement, blocking, lighting, editing, composition, and other such elements is crucial to its merit. It's one thing to have the characters just say something out loud in a spoken language, but if you want to make a good film, you have to show it using film language. Even if you have no interest in film and you want to just make something like a video game, understanding other mediums is crucial. In past videos, I've mentioned Level Up, Scott Rogers' book on game design, and one of the things I love in it is he has a whole section talking about how so much of what he learned from game design came from Disneyland. If you want to make something and you're just focused on the here and now of one specific medium, you are missing out on so many different things that can elevate what you're trying to create. Also, reading into history and the humanities can be immensely helpful. As it turns out, if you want to make something that resonates with the human condition, it helps to understand the human condition. Whether you want to write, draw, animate, film, act, compose, or design, to be a good artist is to be curious. So it sucks when the online spaces we inhabit encourage us to be as incurious as possible. So we talked about the benefits and necessity of understanding a breadth of mediums and aspects of humanity when creating something or having serious conversations about art. Okay, now let's talk about weebs in the 2010s.
What? One more thing. There, now it's art. Well, what do you think, Squidward?
As someone in high school and college for most of that decade, I, of course, met those kinds of weebs. You know the kind. The ones who would proudly shout that anime is art, give you recommendations, and upon watching those recommendations, you would revile in horror at the utter schlock you've been made subject to. Yeah, that.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Meanwhile, they would often only want to watch anime, and that anime would have to be made 2006 or later. I never jived with this. I saw no benefit of reducing the pool of media you consume to such an extent, and also felt that such a goal was completely at odds with wanting to proclaim it being art. I remember hearing people say anime is its own medium, which always struck me as like saying Bollywood is its own medium, or surrealist French silent films are their own medium. It's fundamentally animation, which in turn is part of film. If anything, I always took this installation as, I like this, therefore I want it to be seen as art so it can feel important. However, I don't want it to be subject to the standards and discussion that comes with it. It's weird too, because shielding things from critique and shielding things from negativity are not the same thing. Keeping away complaints is one thing, and in my opinion isn't good either. We should always be trying to figure out how we can make things better going forward. But by doing this, you're also shielding yourself from new reasons to find enjoyment out of something. I'll admit though, that's a realm where I was more of an outsider, so let's pivot to gamers from around the same time. That's right, nobody is safe, not even me. Similarly, there was a push for video games to be recognized as an art form. This is something I quickly got behind, as I strongly believe that it is, and the better we can understand the language of the medium, the better games we'll get. That said, I wasn't completely without fault here. I wanted my favorite games to be given value, I will readily admit that. However, that's not the only reason I brought up gaming discussion back then. Let's talk about Anita Sarkeesian, and namely the reaction to her. Now, I'm not here to litigate whether or not these were good videos. What I am here to discuss is the embodiment of culture clash this whole shit show embodied. Feminist theory, queer theory, and etc. are media studies. Part of analyzing literature or film or other such mediums is to look at them from a variety of different lenses and see what that reveals about the subject and how that reflects the time and culture of its creation. So, with the push for gaming to be seen as an art form, it was only a matter of time before people outside the fray of early 2010s gamer culture started treating it as one. And to say that this culture was ill-equipped to handle that is an understatement. While the late 2000s edgy, angry reviewer and G4, you like video games? Cool, I like boobies too, phase was dying out, it was still in the rear view mirror. So in the end, instead of seeing someone look at popular games through this lens and evaluate where we are and where we can go, all they saw was someone speaking authoritatively about why the things they like aren't feminist and therefore bad, like this is a game review and not discussing theory.
But remember that it's both possible, and even necessary, to simultaneously enjoy media, while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious aspects.
Who are you? What is this? This isn't the gaming rapist. What? Mario is bad? How dare you? I'm actually going to try to kill you!
Wait, what the fuck? The funniest thing to me in hindsight about all this was the responses of, no, this isn't part of the discussion. Video games don't reflect real life. Like, I don't think a lot of people realized just how much they were backpedaling from the claims that video games were an art form. That's right, video games are an art form that does not have the capacity to be meaningful, resonate with the human condition, or put into perspective where we are as a society. How is it an art form then? What's the language of the medium? What can you do with the tools provided? Plumber boy, find me. It's easy to look at this from an outward perspective and think it's completely backwards and doesn't make any sense. However, it does make sense when you keep in mind that a lot of people saw the idea of video games being seen as an art form as a means of more prestige and legitimacy. They wanted more importance around the things they liked, while also being insulated in their own spaces that they didn't anticipate what would come with that. Insularity can be one hell of a drug. Well, at least these are low-stake conversations about the things we like. It's not like we talk about politics on So before talking about the things I wish I didn't have to talk about, let's discuss the social element of how these sites operate. On social media, algorithms are in place to personalize your experience, feeding you content you're more likely to engage with and thus encouraging you to keep spending time on the service in question. So what's wrong with that? A lot. These platforms are designed to be addictive, leaving you in a loop of constant consumption. The more time you spend, the more money they make. However, if you've spent any time looking through your recommendations on YouTube or browsed the For You section on Twitter, You've probably noticed that these algorithms are actually really bad at showing you things you want to see. In fact, a lot of the time it feels like these platforms are constantly showing you exactly what you don't want to see. These platforms promote and monetize outrage to get a reaction out of you for more engagement. They also feel very desperate to find some category to put you in, almost like they're trying to harvest your data to sell to advertisers or something. Which is why this video is sponsored by Securited. Tired of having your data stolen by creepy stock footage people? Well, you can fix that problem by giving it to Ted. You can trust Ted. Securited. It's not theft if you give it away. How much you like or watch something, that doesn't really matter. What seems to matter is whether or not there's volume. You might have listened to documentaries about the Amiga or listened to hours of Commodore 64 music while coding again. Is that what you want to see more of? Too bad, there aren't enough trendy videos on the subject right now for us to recommend anything. You absent-mindedly click on a drama video you quickly find insufferable and promptly click out of? Oh boy, now YouTube has a stream of content to pour down your little throat like the bitch you are. Well, if that's so much of an issue, just search for something else. Well, the search tool has also been degrading. For instance, let's say I want to watch a video about Star Wars Rogue Squadron. I'll search for it, it'll show me a few long plays, a not very good video from someone whose understanding of the game is about as good as his ability to donate to charity, and other videos from years ago that I've already watched. I'll keep scrolling and I get some very tangentially related things before it just turns into my recommended page again. Huh, I guess nobody's talking about these games anymore. That's really sad and, well, psych! A few years later, you'll be given recommendation videos about the subject that were made at the point in time you were looking for them. YouTube doesn't want you watching anything you haven't seen already. It's all about that loop. Well, that sucks. Well, I guess I'll look for a suitable alternative. Whoops, too bad, these platforms are monopolies. Oh boy, I sure do love laissez-faire. It just worked so well the first time. This isn't fun from a creator angle either. Good, well-thought-out videos take a lot of time and effort to put together. Meanwhile, you're competing against high-volume inflammatory bullshit and content mill garbage. Hell, sometimes both at once. Oh well, at least I have my video essays. This stuff can't possibly happen there.
The need to feed this beast called the algorithm doesn't just end in a few bad takes.
You want to maximize your profits by making a video every other day? How do you write that much material? You don't!
May need to result to a little thing that I like to call stealing.
The phrase content mill refers to organizations which produce huge amounts of material very quickly, designed to get attention with no interest in quality. Go to audible.com/repent Harlequin to enter a coma and escape this madness!
So yeah, if you can't produce enough volume to compete on your own, you can always steal shit or exploit a team of people under you in your deranged indentured servitude ring, while also having those people steal for you. What a perfect environment for good creative material to come through. Regardless of if you're browsing these platforms or creating things to be put on them, they encourage comparative thinking, competitiveness, hustle culture, and the production of low-effort, high-volume, inflammatory reaction content. Trying to make a career on YouTube is a futile game of trying to keep your soul intact as you're forced to compete with those who will take any opportunity they can to sell more of it away for more views, more clicks, and more engagement.
What's that?
Declaration of Principles.
I don't know about you, but I'm not a very competitive person. I don't like being competitive. I just like making things, or sharing my thoughts and putting it all out there for those who want to listen. It's frustrating to be constantly drowned out, but if the alternative necessitates me to lie, cheat, steal, or exploit, yeah, I'm happy down here with my 2,000 subs, thanks. The way our society is structured tends to make us individualize our problems. So it's easy to take any adversity or hint of failure we face, internalize it, and shame ourselves over it. This isn't just an internet problem, but it's also very much a factor here. You might Google how to get more views, and you'll read articles and see tweets that say if you don't get views, it's your fault because your videos are shit. However, when you see what actually does get views, It's so dystopian that it pulls you right out of your state of self-blame, leaving you feeling like you're watching a goddamn Twilight Zone episode.
It's the Squid Game guards in Roblox!
Yeah, my videos may not be anything amazing, but at least I'm not promoting extremely unrealistic body image standards while lying about how I got there for the purpose of selling you products that don't work, purposefully poisoning the well of discussion as a means of radicalization, or making fetish content farm shit aimed at children.
What the f am I looking at?
We are Lizard Squad.
When looking at a lot of the most popular people on social media, their core demographic tends to be younger people. This might seem a little innocuous at first, and maybe even expected. However, internet media is not the same as traditional media in a very critical way. On TV or in films, you're subject to regulations specifically put in place to protect children and the consumer in general. The internet, comparatively, is what happens when those don't exist. True, these platforms aren't allowed to collect their data, but they have also repeatedly gotten in trouble for collecting their data. YouTube in particular has gotten in trouble for violating COPPA, and has also been grilled a lot for the stuff on YouTube Kids being very much not appropriate for kids. They have been caught red-handed, but whoops, looks like they're back at it again. I've been talking a lot about YouTube in this video as it's the platform I've used the most and have the most experience on it both as a viewer and creator, so the degradation has been far more noticeable for me. However, it's not the only game in town when it comes to places that are very much not safe for children. Twitter, frankly, isn't safe for anyone. Like many, I'm praying that it just burns to the ground, but I'm continually baffled by how the flame somehow keeps getting stronger and yet the wooden planks holding it in place still remain. I could talk about how it's somehow gotten even worse after Elon Musk bought it, but to ignore how bad it was before that would be disingenuous. To be honest, I feel like Twitter has done so much damage to how we communicate that it's not even funny. The whole idea of Twitter is speed. You want to say something? Well, fit it in 280 characters. However, it was designed to be the voice of the people, for people to get news and relay information to each other. The problem is, when your sole focus is brevity and clicks, that's inevitably going to impact your ability to do that subject justice. Mix that with an algorithm that incentivizes inflammatory statements and rage bait, and you have a hellscape that encourages reductive thinking and utter contempt for your fellow man. I feel like not only this has been bad for Twitter, but also serves as a bad influence for all social media. Let's call it the Twitterification of social media. Focus on being eye-catching and feeding off of humanity's worst impulses, all to farm engagement, reduce and divide people into groups, and gain clout and fortune off of other people's misery. There have been countless studies proving time and time again that this shit is awful for cognitive development and how reducing your time on social media leads to better mental health. A lot of the discussion in recent years has revolved around TikTok. Now, I hadn't really used the site before, as when it was gaining traction, there were talks about it suppressing LGBT content, especially trans content. So as a queer creator, I stayed away. So it's easy for me to just look at what's being said and take it at face value, but I don't know. There is certainly a moral panic surrounding some of this stuff, and in those circumstances, it's very important to take a step back, look at everything, and differentiate the legitimate from the bullshit. So let's download TikTok and see what happens. Welcome to the audio-visual equivalent of Twitter, and my god, do I hate it. As awful as Twitter is, at least it's only screaming at you figuratively. Imagine if you could hear Twitter. Does that sound like hell? Well, it is. Oh well, just don't open it. Well, it will bombard you with notifications begging you to come back in. And when you don't relent, it'll start bombarding your email instead. Huh. I wonder why my inbox is running out of space. Like any social media platform, you can find some good stuff on it, but the bad is absolutely heinous, and if anything, seems to be more influential here than on other platforms. Conspiracy theorists, scam artists, purveyors of body image issues and toxic beliefs whatever the fuck this is.
Oh, thank you, baby. This is so cute. That was good. Lemonade. Yeah. Yes.
All these people and more have been given a megaphone in a race to the bottom to see who can damage society the most. You know, the perfect place for a developing mind, let alone any mind at all. But why does so much of this stuff target children? Well, influencers like Logan Paul and Mr. Beast do it because it doesn't take much intellectual stimulation to retain their attention or get them to engage. As long as you're flashy and bombastic enough, it won't matter how many dead bodies you film. It's also easier to get them to engage in the ways you push them towards, i.e. buy merch, burgers, or dubious energy drinks.
Hey everyone! I'm proud to introduce my own line of burgers. It's called Luna Burger. What makes a Luna Burger different? Well, first, we take out the beef. Then, we add a touch of seasoning for subtle flavor.
Then we get out the secret sauce and go to town!
Is it FDA approved? Stop asking questions. Go onto our food delivery app and soon a driver will come to our single totally fabulous location and begin the long, agonizing, and confusing trek to your door. Don't worry, they're criminally underpaid.
Hell, seeing the profit to be made in the influencer space, big companies are getting involved, especially when it comes to beauty influencers.
In the Wired article, TikTok is changing what it means to be old. Someone who's in their mid-20s knows about anti-aging marketing, and they're not wrapped up in the idea that if they get one wrinkle, they're going to die, Laurier says. But if you market that to a 12-year-old, they're really going to internalize that and take it to the next level.
Beauty standards have become absolutely absurd. There is so much pressure to fit this insane expectation of perpetually being in your early 20s, having a round, youthful face with injected puffy lips, flawless makeup 24/7, a slim, thick figure with massive breasts, huge, wide hips, and a perfectly thin waist, and that's before we go into expensive clothing. It's not a natural look, nor is it a sustainable look. I remember when starting transition and hanging out with some of my cis female friends, and they were lamenting how they can't wear cute or trendy clothing because they're now too old to try to look attractive. They were in their mid-20s. This was especially awkward for me because, well, I just got here. And you're telling me it's already too late for me to have fun with my gender expression?
The same Wired article continues. I started noticing this trend of people who are essentially your peers. They're a few years younger than you, addressing people who are older than them like they're elderly, talking to them like they're a senior citizen, says Laurier, who is based in the US state of Georgia. In January, she made a TikTok about the rampant ageism she sees on the app. The way it is normal these days for someone in their late teens or early 20s to call someone in their late 20s or 30s old or washed up, I just find that really disturbing, she said in the video. In late February, the teenage look filter took over the app.
So here I am as a woman online, and not only do I have to worry about being shamed for being trans, but I also now have to worry about not being young enough to not be shamed for my appearance or otherwise not fitting a highly manufactured look? Which leads us to something else. Let's say you're 23 and neck deep into this culture, but insecure with the thought of getting slightly older. What do you do then? Well, luckily there's a whole culture on TikTok all about anti-aging and oh sweet lord.
The same Wired article continues. Towards the end of 2022, 8.8 million people watched a TikTok in which a young woman warned viewers, stop sleeping on your stomach or side or your face will droop. One tweeted response to the video later earned more than 6,000 likes. It reads, "It's terrifying that the anti-aging industry has warmed its way into younger and younger audiences. Teenage girls shouldn't have to feel constantly terrified that everything they do is causing their face to look older."
Thinking too much gives you wrinkles.
Hey Sims! Welcome to today's product review brought to you by our friends at Orphan Tears. If you want to look as good as me, you're going to want to buy a lifetime supply of Orphan Tears Anti-Age Serum. Simply apply to your face every 15 seconds for the rest of your life, and you'll never age ever. It contains highly corrosive acid. It burns! And if somehow it doesn't work for you, which by the way is your fault for having inferior genes, simply mix it in with a skin firming cream that actually works! So I bet the guys in the audience are letting out a collective sigh of relief. Wow, that all looks scary and dystopian. I sure dodged a bullet by being a guy.
Don't be so certain.
There are plenty of male equivalents to this sort of thing. You can have influencers like the Liver King, who looks like this because he's a totes legit natural man that isn't taking steroids. He was taking steroids. You also have influencers who both serve as body and political influencers, and oh geez, I was trying to put this off. In an interview with CNN, Arnold Schwarzenegger was talking about growing up watching the twilight years of his father, who was a Nazi during World War II, and how he saw a broken man who can never take back what he did. He was describing this as a cautionary tale for those today, that if you go down this road, there is nothing good down on the other side. This, of course, was linked with talking about modern right-wing extremism and the January 6th insurrection.
It's a wake-up call to let people know that you have to take this seriously, not just like, oh, let's get those right-wingers, let's put them to jail and all of this stuff. No, this is much more than that. You know, what creates something like that? Sadly, I have to say that no one really has covered it well.
Part of it was that they were told that the election in 2020 was stolen.
That alone would not drive anyone to Washington. I think there was just such an unbelievable dissatisfaction. There's so much anger.
In the past decade, it's been harder to ignore how bad things have gotten. Cost of living has gotten out of control, and getting an income to match the incoming demands have become untenable for so many. I was born in 1994, and in retrospect, what followed was one hell of a time to be a kid. We were taught to trust in our institutions, that all it took to have a good life was an education and a little hard work. While that was relatively easy to say to a white American in the late 90s, as my childhood continued, the world and any remaining credence to that notion was falling apart. Enron, Lehman Brothers, Bernie Madoff, the 2008 financial crisis. Time and time again, the people at the top were exposed for what they really were, yet everyone else paid the price. The world was repeatedly thrust into suffering because of the actions of irresponsible opportunists driven by their own greed. Meanwhile, in school and whatnot, I felt like I was shielded from the possibility that this would affect us long term. Instead, what I'd hear more of was, "You kids are going to do so well, you know how to use computers." Or, "Stay in school, go to college, and you'll get a good job. That's all it takes. You'll be able to buy a car, a house, support a family, and retire at 60. If you can't, that means you're not trying hard enough." Yet by the time we were adults and trying to just survive, it was abundantly clear everything was broken, and it's hard not to feel cheated or lied to about that. As the 2010s progressed, there was this growing sense that the problem was fixed, and if you're still complaining, that's on you.
But we did everything you said! I followed all the rules!
You had a lot of college graduates, fresh with their degrees, unable to get anywhere upon being faced with an extremely consolidated market, and were forced to work several minimum wage part-time jobs at once in order to even struggle to get by. But hey, stop eating avocado toast! Something I've never actually seen anyone eat. Millennials are killing housing. Millennials are killing industry. Those darn millennial teenagers are eating Tide Pods, despite the fact that the youngest millennials at this point were in their 20s. Instead of addressing the conditions leading to these things happening, it became a matter of shaming people and finding ways to characterize them in order to justify it, because hey, unemployment is down and the stock market is up. Therefore, there are no issues. You can't afford a house? Here, have a single-room apartment that's an absurd amount of money every month, but hey, it has a refrigerator, so therefore it's luxury. Who needs community spaces, am I right? Well, okay, if things are this bad, then at least we can distract ourselves with quality entertainment, right? After all, stories are how we communicate with each other. I mean, in the 1970s, films like Easy Rider tapped into the frustrations of the youth market and made bank doing it. What do you mean we mostly just get stale, out-of-touch takes on past work that fails to resonate with the public and presents the idea that systemically, everything is fine?
But look, we included a gay for a single shot that will cut out overseas. Progressivism achieved. Are you happy, gays? No. Hell, things have only gotten worse since then. Since the pandemic, we've had loads of other issues with this stuff pop up. AI now reads your resume and determines if you get a job or not. Ghost listings are now omnipresent, where job listings exist but with no intention to be filled. They're just there for the sake of giving the illusion of growth. How is this not illegal? So yeah, I think I've painted a pretty clear picture here. We grew up being told that we lived in a just, fair world, that history was over, and those who get there earn it. As adults, we found ourselves entering a cold world where the people at the top are constantly destroying everything, our opportunities and even our voices are robbed from us, and we're just supposed to sit there and act like everything is fine, actually. Why are you complaining? I'm over here having fun whilst licking boot. You're just being toxic. And keep in mind, that's just one way people can feel left out in today's world. That's not even going into things like mass loneliness. So with all of that, is it any wonder why there's ample frustration to tap into? So people are frustrated and have every right to be. But where do you go from there? In Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon tells a young Anakin Skywalker,
"Always remember, your focus determines your reality."
This line taps into the power of perception and how if you believe something strongly enough, then it becomes indistinguishable from reality. So it's one thing to recognize that things aren't how they were promised. It's one thing to recognize when things are shit. However, understanding why can be daunting. A very common unhealthy habit is to blame ourselves for everything, and a huge reason as to why is because we can control ourselves. If we are the root of the problem, it is easier to take steps to make things better. However, sometimes things are just rough independently of us. Sometimes we just end up in bad situations. When that's the case, it's a lot harder to figure out what we can tangibly do to make things how they should be, and it's easy to feel powerless, directionless, and frankly horrified. It's a very vulnerable state to be in, and when so many people feel so vulnerable, the more others will come in and exploit them. Hey there, champ. You feel like society has left you behind, huh? Well, all you need to do is become a Giga Chad and crush those responsible. That's right, some minority that has nothing to do with any of this. We're going to take that self-blame and push it somewhere else. Namely, anywhere other than the actual root issues, because if we tackled those, we couldn't use you for political and financial gain. This sort of thing ends up serving two functions. It absolves the exploited person of any guilt, while also giving them an easy answer. This is an area where the insulating nature of the internet becomes really insidious. But wait, finding vulnerable people, taking advantage of their feelings of disenfranchisement, presenting them with a community of like-minded individuals, isolating them from outside influences, and presenting them with a false reality with an easy target as an enemy? Isn't this how cults work? And unfortunately, rejection is a powerful recruitment tool. If all someone hears from outside influences is anger and just being shot down, they're just going to go to where they get validation. It's honestly pretty tragic to see. While a lot of these narratives are being constructed in bad faith, a lot of people passing them around are doing so in good faith. It's important to remember that this isn't a matter of being smart or dumb. Smart people can fall into these narratives. Hell, I'm not some infallible source of information. I make mistakes all the time. It's important to recognize that this sort of thing, and a lot of the internet in general, really tries to nullify the part of the brain that does critical thinking. It thrives on primal emotional reactions. We all like to think that we're the informed ones and that everyone else is the idiot, but it's important to question where we get our information and hold ourselves accountable. We're all capable of spreading misinformation. We're all capable of accepting misinformation as fact if it fits our pre-existing beliefs. It's important to take a step back and think before jumping into action. This idea is unfortunately pretty incompatible with social media's react now or forever hold your peace nature, but it is something nonetheless that we should strive for. And unfortunately, this isn't just something to dismiss as, oh well, that's internet shit, because when people are trapped in a media loop of fear-mongers convincing them that other groups are out to get them and bring down society as we know it, it's going to impact how they interact with those people offline too. Even when I'm offline, not touching social media for days, and I'm just out and about doing my own thing, I can tell when transphobia is getting worse online, because people treat me differently when that happens. It's absolutely terrifying to be on the receiving end of that sort of thing, and it's something that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Yet despite the intensity of the hatred at hand here, it's redirected whenever there's something actually going on. It's pretty jarring to go outside one day and be met with extreme vitriol, and then the next day, suddenly, all of that's gone. At first, you feel relieved. Then you find out why people are suddenly not treating you like filth. It's because something horrible just happened, and the provocateurs are focusing on that for the moment. While the fears being tapped into have to exist beforehand, situations like that really go to show how manufactured a lot of this is. Us existing is this huge existential threat that needs to be stomped out at all costs, as long as they don't have their seasonal primetime lineup.
Now, I imagine that most of the people watching this video right now are cis, and some of you might be thinking, okay, well, that sucks for you, but at least I don't have to worry about it. Problem is, we are all in this together. In the ABC News article, Killing Harassment Spotlights Transphobia's Impact on All People, Chiara Alfonseca writes, Michelle D. Peacock was relaxing under a gazebo at her apartment complex in Richmond, Indiana, when police say she was attacked and killed by her neighbor, Tommy Earl. Following his arrest, a court affidavit of Earl's discussion with police state that Earl allegedly referred to Peacock, a 59-year-old black cisgender woman, as a male acting like a woman. He allegedly told police, "I finally went off, man," and that he's not ashamed of it. Both transgender and cisgender women have been experiencing ridicule, rejection, assault, and even being killed for not meeting this made-up ideal of what defines a woman, said Leroy B. Thomas, the communications director at the National Center for Transgender Equality, in an interview with ABC News. This is why it's so incredibly important to have solidarity between cisgender and transgender people, said Thomas. While our experiences are different in many ways, transphobia and misogyny hurt all of us.
So you might be thinking, okay, so the social media landscape is not an ideal place for talking about politics. I guess I just won't consume political media online. But good luck doing that! So, as many of you know, I'm a huge Star Wars fan and have been since I was very little. It is also the key reason I learned to keep fandoms of things I like at arm's length. For a while, I was able to engage more actively in Star Wars discussion online. Some people gave me shit for liking the prequels, others didn't. Then the Plinkett reviews took off, which not only reignited prequel backlash and discourse, but also poisoned the well with really bad faith interpretations of the movies in order to suit a pre-existing conclusion, which, of course, people just mindlessly repeated. Now, if I were to talk about these movies with people, arguments wouldn't be about what they did right or wrong. It would be about what even happened in the movies at all. I stood my ground, but I also had to ask myself how much of this nonsense was worth subjecting myself to. So instead of going around picking fights, I kinda just tried to tune the BS out and looked at each film in the series on its own merits on my own terms. This would become handy later. I say this because the sequel trilogy was on the horizon and quickly became a baffling disaster that couldn't be ignored. Both the movies and the backlash. I've done whole videos about this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But yes, I do think that the sequel trilogy is the worst trilogy. However, there were also a lot of videos and the like that poisoned the well with really bad faith interpretations of the movies in order to suit a pre-existing conclusion, which of course people just mindlessly repeated. Oh god, not this shit again. However, this time, there was this huge culture war bent to the discussion. Much like J.J. Abrams tried to find as many ways to have the characters run away from stuff as possible that he neglected to tell a story, the fans tried to find as many ways to project political narratives onto the movies so much that they neglected to actually discuss their merits as films. The The Force Awakens isn't a bad film because it has a prominent black character, as if this would even be a first for this series. No, it's bad because JJ fundamentally does not know what story he's telling, thus leaving all of his directing choices with no motivation behind them, with jarring editing in place to create energy regardless of if it fits the scene or not, and to distract you from just how clumsy everything is. The film reeks of someone too focused on rushing everything to the end to be bothered to check if the blocking, shot composition, and continuity of frame even work. But hey, don't worry about that, because we'll throw so much imagery from the original films in there that you'll assume the film has a story at all due to association. There was a lot to talk about, but instead the discussions mostly served to reinforce the idea that including people who aren't straight white cis men in prominent roles is in of itself performative, fake, and politically driven. If you do so much as even that, it is worth dismissing before it even has the chance to come out. Oh well, that was around a decade ago, sweet Jesus. So at the very least we should know better by now, right? Nope, it's happening again! Because we here in the Star Wars fanbase have a proud tradition of never learning anything!
Fire in space. That's everything you need to know about the new Star Wars series directed by a woke female director.
They're complaining about fire in space.
In Star Wars.
Now, normally I wouldn't ask questions about when and where you selectively suspend your disbelief, but you literally just told me. As for what I think of the new show, I don't know yet. I'm waiting until it's all said and done before imparting judgment. Yeah, I might be missing out on making trending posts, but at the same time I won't be posting embarrassing shit like this. No, diversity and quality are diametrically opposed. They're mutually exclusive. You cannot possibly have both. Impossible. Predictably, as a queer artist, I find that narrative very frustrating. That said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that obnoxiously superficial pop culture feminism wasn't a thing in the 2010s. Hell, there's a reason why, even in feminist and left-wing spaces, BuzzFeed feminism, white feminism, girl boss feminism, pop feminism, whatever you want to call it, has a very bad rap and is often made fun of.
I'm Kelly Slaughter, founder and CEO of Ally. Our story begins a few years ago when I was at a business conference in Switzerland about lethal autonomous weapons. And I looked around the room and I realized, oh my God, I'm the only woman here.
But to attribute all of the film's faults and feelings of corporate cynicism to that, and not a consolidated film industry where more and more resources are put into fewer and fewer productions, leading to those few productions to be high risks in of themselves, leaving corporations to try to engineer them to be as safe as possible, is very disingenuous and once again redirects attention away from the problem. This wasn't just frustrating as a queer trans woman. This wasn't just frustrating as someone with a passion for storytelling. This wasn't just frustrating as a die-hard Star Wars fan. This was frustrating as someone who likes having genuine and interesting conversations with people about media. And we can't have that if you make any and all discussion about disproving deranged conspiracy theories and what shadows you're jumping at.
I barely recognize this country anymore. The government's got us seeing communists in our soup.
Obviously, analyzing a piece of media's politics, how that fits with the social context around it, and how it applies to the real world isn't inherently bad, like, at all. This can be a very valuable discussion to have, and to outright ignore it in conversations about things like The Twilight Zone, RoboCop, and yes, the George Lucas Star Wars movies robs them of a good chunk of their substance. An artist should be able to find inspiration anywhere. To take what you find frustrating in the world and use that as the groundwork for a story is a very common impulse to have, and it shouldn't be demonized or dismissed outright. However, online discussion has done exactly that, to such an extent that even through an abstracted lens, we cannot have things like those examples without extreme backlash. And if all you do is shut out art, how the hell are you going to find it? If all we do is discourage artists from sharing their feelings lest our perspectives be challenged, how the hell are we going to get anything genuine? But hey, social media is really good at that, no matter what you're talking about and who's talking. It's easy to point fingers at hysterical conservatives and their bad faith paranoia-inducing arguments. However, to claim that they are the only ones guilty of this incurious insularity is highly inaccurate. In the past several years, videos covering more serious subjects have become more popular, whether it be covering dark periods of history, the stories of cults, murderers, criminals, or current internet drama. Now, I don't think this is inherently a bad thing. A lot of this stuff is worth talking about, raising awareness of, and sharing. But this stuff is also not to be taken lightly, and when things get popular, promise wealth, and while we can't even be trusted to talk about Star Wars without messing up, oh god no. It didn't help that 2023 was a big year when it came to crazy shit happening on YouTube. Popular creators on the site getting exposed for their, to put it lightly, alarming misdeeds. Colleen Ballinger, Illuminati, and so on. At first, like a lot of people, my eyes were glued to the train wreck, and I listened to a few videos about each. However, the more I watched, the more I felt that these videos were just copying each other. This was especially noticeable with the Illuminati drama because in that case, a lot of her victims made videos talking about their experience which got a lot of traction. And they weren't hard to find, so it was all the more noticeable when these drama video creators would just make a video right after one of these drops, reciting what was talked about in it, while the video consisted of footage from the aforementioned video. I don't know, it doesn't exactly seem all that transformative to me. For every person doing their due diligence and original journalism, there were countless people basically just making reaction content while being able to hide behind spreading awareness as a shield. But if they're not adding to the conversation, why make the video? What's the point? This video is brought to you by Organic Orchard Orchard. I can't. You know, some things are much easier to type. Tired of using your tiny Lego legs to go to the store and pick up fresh fruit? Well, we're here to help, bringing fruit we stole from a food bank and mailing it straight to your door. Note, food may rot upon arrival, no refunds. At this point, not only does it feel pretty scummy to regurgitate a video by a victim talking about their experiences for money, but when it exists in the same market as the original video, it sure feels like you're just stealing their ad revenue. I can understand finding schadenfreude in stories where bad people get exposed for what they did and wanting to see them getting taken down. Trust me, I need to listen to stuff while I draw, and I am not above being petty. However, it's important to take a step back and think more critically about what you're watching, especially when the derivative nature of it risks a telephone effect as its sole transformative element. Misinformation is never good, but it definitely varies in severity, and the more serious the subject, the more careful you have to be. The same applies to what narratives you present and what other traits you equate to the misdeeds in question. Self-described body language experts have been under a lot of fire for this, as they point out things like having a hard time maintaining eye contact as signs you're dealing with a murderer, when there are plenty of other reasons for that. Like autism. Yeah, despite a lot of these videos largely attracting a progressive left-wing audience, they are still prone to spreading harmful or bigoted ideas. I remember one of the videos I watched about the Colleen Ballinger disaster pointed out how in the infamous ukulele video, she's putting on a filter to hide wrinkles. At that point I stopped the video and thought to myself, why bring this up? What good does pointing this out do? You might say, well, it doesn't matter because she's a terrible person, but if anything, that makes this even more important to question because this quickly stops being about just her and starts being about everyone else caught in the crossfire. In a society and online space that constantly pressures you to look young, present your best self, and demonizes any signs of aging, I don't know, putting on a filter to hide that doesn't seem that outlandish. To take this situation here, all the messed up shit she allegedly did to her underage fans, and for your immediate takeaway to just amount to, lol, she's old. I don't know, I think you're missing the issue here. Talking about the horrible things people have done to others does not give you license to throw people who have nothing to do with what you're talking about under the bus, whether they be autistic people who have a hard time maintaining eye contact, women living in a society that tells them that their prime is over absurdly early, or trans women just breathing. None of these are crimes or even things that intrinsically lead to crimes. Being those things doesn't exempt people from wrongdoing either, and it's sad that I even have to clarify that, but we should criticize people for what they have done, not what they are, and to suggest that both are the same is legitimately dangerous. It also trivializes the stories of the victims, as the wider you cast the net, the more reason the audience has to doubt what you're saying. Granted, with how blasé these subjects can be discussed on here, mixed with all that, it's clear that way too many creators in this space do not care about the victims or the stories that they cover. They just see them as a quick and easy payday. YouTube will now demonetize you for using words connected to these topics, which can't fault them for trying, but it's not going to solve the problem because this video is sponsored by Aunt Gertie's Soul Harvester. For a simple fee of your entire life savings, Aunt Gertie will suck the soul out from your nipples and into hers. How is this legal? Simple. The FTC doesn't know about it yet. I've been really ragging on YouTube sponsorships this whole video, but I don't entirely blame the people making the videos. The whole reason this has become a thing is because YouTube infamously pays like trash. Patreon is losing some of its popularity, and sponsorships provide more stability in a notoriously unstable space. However, my god, please vet whoever you sponsor, because yikes. Some of these companies are really shady when you look into them. There was already an irony to YouTubers talking about bad businesses promoting these, but now, in the wake of all the crazy Illuminati shit, you get drama YouTubers talking about her, pointing out the very real irony that she talked about corrupt businesses while being one herself before they promptly pivot to promoting corrupt businesses themselves. Like, what is going on here? In the early days of YouTube, it had more robust community features. You could add each other as friends, you can send each other personal messages, you could post video responses, and so on. Channel pages were also a lot more customizable, and it was also a lot easier to find what you wanted to see. The site felt a lot more personal back then. It felt like you were broadcasting yourself, appropriately enough. I recognize that it wasn't some utopia, and there were a lot of issues with old YouTube as well, but I have a lot of fond memories of spending time on the site as a teenager. However, as the site made changes, often with people kicking and screaming each time, the community features and customization were gradually stripped away. A lot of the personality is gone, and because of how the algorithm works, everyone is making basically the same videos as each other. People don't really stick around your channel anymore. They're just in a loop of videos about that subject. I remember making friends on YouTube, which seems inconceivable to me now, but it's true. I remember back when, if you were reviewing something and nobody else had reviewed that thing yet, that was like striking gold, because if someone searched for it, they'd probably find your video. But people don't search for things anymore. Why would they when the search feature doesn't even work? YouTube also prefers it when you're making more or less the same kind of video, and often. So how do you differentiate yourself in a sea of other people doing it? What reason does the viewer have to subscribe? Because you told them to?
Because you told me to!
Again, I am a smaller YouTuber, always have been, and am frankly pretty content with that. However, if I'm talking about something everyone else is, I want to have my own observations, my own angle, my own opinions. Sometimes I've been called a contrarian, but a lot of that comes from if I just agree with what everyone else is saying, why would I even make the video? What would I be adding to the discussion? The idea of just doing that feels cynical and boring. What frustrates me is that now this platform actively rewards that and punishes anything else. What, you want to take your time and think things through before saying them? So 2 seconds ago. You gotta hit it while it's hot or shut up. Instead, more effort needs to be put into marketing yourself. You need to have a streamlined bio, an active social media presence elsewhere to bring more people in, and you need to do exactly what everyone else is doing when everyone else is doing it. You're not getting views? You're not getting engagement? Well, you're posting about the wrong things, or have the wrong things in your bio. If you were more like this other person, then you'd be doing better. It fosters this hustle culture, comparative thinking, and grass is greener mentality, even if that might not be how it plays out in practice. When doing research for this video, I've seen a lot of people use this fixation on labels to justify their bigotry, which is a shitty impulse and doesn't do anything to actually address the issue. We do not live in an equal society, and for some the divisions might be more abstract, whereas others, it impacts their lives on a daily basis. So for people in a marginalized group to gather together, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, for the record, most of my friends are cisgender men, and I am entirely okay with that. But do I wish I knew more trans people in person? Honestly, yeah. When I'm alone in my apartment playing video games, watching a movie, composing music, or whatever, I'm not really thinking about the fact that I'm trans. Hell, since transitioning, I've actually thought about it way less in those situations because this just feels normal to me. However, when I either go outside or venture onto social media, how often am I reminded that I'm trans? Constantly. I am very keenly aware that I live in a world that is not equipped to have me in it. We have existed since the dawn of man, and yet that history has been suppressed by those hell-bent on erasing it. So here I am, going through life, living unique experiences, and consequently, don't have much to guide me through them. Even when I'm not dealing with transphobia directly, I am living through the consequences of its past. It's easy to feel deeply isolated and alone, even when surrounded by other people. Then when our leaders decide to attack us, the people they govern, those they swore to protect, not only is it terrifying, but if you're surrounded by people who have no idea what that's like, they probably don't know how to help you. Or worse, might even dismiss what you're saying. In those circumstances especially, seeing other people like you can be extremely powerful and very helpful. I am open about being trans for a few reasons. For one, it's probably the first thing a lot of people are going to notice about me anyway, so I might as well just own it. That, and I also just don't like lying to people. I also don't really feel like deleting all of my older videos, despite disliking a good chunk of them. But also, if me just being open while also just being myself can genuinely help people, then I want to do it. There are huge issues with how social media uses labels, but labels in of themselves aren't inherently bad. However, labels can only go so far. A person can't be reduced completely into a single word.
I don't think any word can explain a man's life.
We are each our own mosaic. Yes, being trans has shaped a lot of my life, but it's not everything about me. I am a lot of things, not just one thing or another, and some of those things might matter more to me than others. There might be things that I am that personally I don't really think much or care much about, but for other people, that might be something that has profoundly impacted their life, and it wouldn't be right for me to tell them that it doesn't matter. Nor would it be okay for them to tell me what I should value in myself above all else. Earlier I mentioned the conservative fear-mongering around millennials in the late 2010s. As someone who was born in the mid-90s, this sort of generational shit-flinging has always struck me as odd. I remember being in college when that was going down, and at least at the time, it seemed like nobody had when millennials stopped and Gen Z began pinned down. It's this year, no it's this year, it's this year, no it's that year. I remember either seeing or being part of this kind of exchange way too often back then. Hey, are we millennials or Gen Z? I don't even fucking know anymore. Again, I fail to see how my life experiences are dramatically different from someone who was born like a year or two after me, whereas I'd have more in common with someone born in 1980. It all feels extremely arbitrary and doesn't really make sense in practice, so to assign personality characteristics to these things just feels weird.
In the Forbes article, Generational Labels, Why It's Time to Put Them to Rest, Sheila Callahan writes, "You see them all the time. Generational labels assigned to age cohorts suggesting shared beliefs, behaviors, and values. They are used in marketing and advertising strategies as well as in articles and research. If they're so prominent, then why are they a problem? Because the assigned characteristics are trivial, misleading, and often lead to bigotry. Age bashing and generational finger pointing negatively influence societal attitudes from healthcare to employment, and it goes both ways. It's ugly to be sure, but it's also driven in part by the fact that the current culture has been duped into thinking these labels have any real meaning. They don't. The arbitrary designation has no scientific basis. Dr. Cohen cites Pew research showing that most Americans cannot identify the generations to which Pew claims they belong. Generational naming suggests a distinct character, and then imposing qualities on diverse populations without basis, resulting in the current widespread problem of crude stereotyping. It's pseudoscience, he writes. Yes, people are impacted by the world they live in during their formative years, but in practice that ends up being more spontaneous than some arbitrary every 15 years or so metric. However, now people put so much emphasis on these generational labels that it's honestly creepy. I'm tempted to call it astrology for idiots, but that's not fair to astrology. That tends to be more accurate. It can be really frustrating to try to find trans or queer-friendly spaces online, only to run into people generation bashing because, judging or shaming others based on arbitrary factors that are beyond the other person's control. Well, that sure isn't ringing any bells.
Everyone, stop firing! We're shooting at our own men!
I bring this up because this is a very good example of what social media does. It whips everyone into an insular and reactionary mindset, looking for reasons to shut others out to the point where self-described leftists are borrowing techniques from Fox News without even realizing it. But hey, if you're new to these spaces and want to belong, you gotta learn the language. Nothing else. It doesn't help either that these online spaces assign labels for pretty much anything you like and anything you do. Absolutely everything has to be a social category. Not alarming at all in spaces where we take arbitrary things and use them as means to judge an entire person. I'd make jokes about politicians fear-mongering over fandoms, except that's already fucking happening.
I've never heard this term. At first I heard Furbies. No, it's furries.
What even is this? Even before social media, our pop culture landscape has had this relationship with peer pressure, where if you see it enough, that means it's expected out of you. Which, of course, social media hasn't helped. Not everyone is going to fit that mold, which is exactly why variety is needed, to diminish the effects of that, if not get rid of it entirely. However, with how social media puts its finger on what you see, you might be seeing a lot of people who don't just present themselves differently from you, but also do so in ways that you would feel uncomfortable in following. But you don't have to follow them. If you're in a spot where you feel peer pressure, it's important to take a step back and ask yourself where it's actually coming from. Is it from the people themselves, or is it from how social media is presenting them to you? Remember how that one viewer reacted to me transitioning? I could be off base here, but I think this is where it's coming from. In the video itself, I was literally just talking about Pac-Man games. I never said you had to be trans or queer or whatever. In fact, that would get me a lot of flack from other trans people. If you've looked at enough trans memes, you might have seen some refer to the Prime Directive, which is kind of this unspoken rule in trans circles that if you think someone might be trans, keep your mouth shut. That's for them to figure out, not you. If they are, they will tell you when they are comfortable doing so. That doesn't mean that it never happens, or that there aren't people who disagree with parts of it, but it's generally understood among trans people that you can't make other people trans, and that even trying to do that is beyond fucked up. If the community doesn't teach you that, then your own experiences trying to be a gender you're not probably will. With other communities, especially some fandoms, I've more commonly seen people joke about converting people, but this always rubbed me the wrong way because not only do I find the idea of you are defined by this one thing you like really weird, but I personally hate the idea of pressuring people to be something else than what they already are, even if it's something minor. Either way, with how much of a problem peer pressure online is, with how much of a problem self-worth and validation is, hanging it on a string and telling people that they'd get more validation if they were something other than themselves is gross, even as a joke. After all, so much of social media, right down to the analytics, genuinely functions like this. Alright, you need to talk about this. This is what people engage with. The other things you talk about don't matter, and the video also needs to be this length. You don't want to face the wrath of the down symbol, do you? What, you want to post something original? Down symbol! You know, sometimes you just want to grab a camera and say, Machine Head for the Sega Saturn, rated kids through adults. Just kidding, it's rated teen for animated blood, violence, and suggestive themes. I've never seen a game before where the rating on the packaging is misaligned. There is a story here and I want to know what it is. Down symbol.
Well, I mean, it is entertaining. Like, she's a naturally funny person, and like that is a skill. But at the same time, you're limited by your personality. Like, she's doing well. She's, top 1% of creators. Yeah. But it's like she's tied down to her personality. If you don't like Emma, then you're not going to watch her videos. You know what I mean? And so there's only so big that can take you.
So this is where we are now. We've gone to broadcasting yourself to having your personality be a liability. YouTube, commodify yourself. Obviously, that isn't going to be a comfortable idea for a lot of people. People like having an idea of who they are and having a shared community of people who accept who they are. And you're not going to get that when your personality is a liability and you're in a system that encourages you to be as bland and cynical as possible. Yet with the fixation on finding a niche paradoxically common enough to find a bunch of other content about, it's basically telling people, don't be a normie. You gotta be quirky. Just not in your own way. We'll show you how. This was one thing when places like YouTube were effectively supplemental media, largely responding to other forms of media, but in a world with a collapsing entertainment industry, the after effects of a pandemic, and an increasingly asocial world, social media has become a very dominant form of social interaction. And with so much of what's pumped out on social media fueling outrage, preying upon the vulnerable to either scam or manipulate them, we have to ask ourselves, is this relaxing? Is this really how we want to spend our downtime? So much of the problem here isn't just with these social media platforms, it's the world we live in. A world where our social and financial needs are not being met. And instead of those in power doing anything to rectify that, they'll distract us and find some wedge issue to get us to fight against each other instead of holding them accountable. This leaves people in a vulnerable state, which gives grifters online ways of preying upon their emotions. Why struggle to get a part-time gig position when you can make videos online? Social media can seem like an escape from this world, but it's important to remember that's an even more exaggerated and dystopian version of that reality. We're all just looking for a sense of connection, stability, and relationship that has largely been robbed from us. It can seem pretty hopeless, but perhaps the first step we can all take is refusing to follow the script we're given. If these platforms are trying to instill habits while on them, we can defy them. If we feel closed off from those around us, we can try to find ways to open us up to each other. Obviously, this will be an option for some more than others, but if you can, it's worth trying. I'm not going to say that we should unplug permanently, but we need to hold ourselves more accountable and spend less time on these platforms. Social media, which despite having the capability of bringing people together, ironically breeds this kind of incuriosity, which makes it harder to relate to people who deviate from whatever popular niche you subscribe to. We need to move away from this. It erodes our empathy, it isolates us further, it keeps us from growing, and in a world all too willing to exploit all those things, we owe it to others and ourselves to not allow that to happen. If nothing else, while unwinding, maybe pull out those DVDs again. If you're playing some video games, maybe don't listen to drama videos about how bad the world is while doing so. If you're concerned about your kids' social media habits, don't just restrict how long they can use it, but provide alternative activities, and also crucially, set a good example by also limiting how much you consume. This is obviously a much bigger subject than can be contained in a single video, and what's here can paint a pretty negative picture. It can seem intimidating to tackle. However, despite the length and difficulty of the journey, It all starts with a single step.